The first panel, I would like to invite our panelists. They are going to discuss why some companies that are headquarters here in the Valley, why are they in Brazil? Why and how are they working with Brazil facing the new challenges of the 2013? I want to invite, first of all, Heather Somerville. Please, Heather. Heather is a business report with the Bay Area News Group covering technology, consumer affairs, and retail. And Heather will be our moderator for the hour. Thank you, Heather. And then I would like you to also invite Avanish from Salesforce.com. Thank you, Avanish. He's VP of Partnerships at Salesforce.com. Please, Andy Sau. Where are you, Andy? All right. Andy Sau, Managing Director of Silicon Valley Bank, and another big friend of Bay Brazil. We've hosted many events at the bank. And then I also would like to invite Vicente Silveira, Director of Engineering at LinkedIn, and also a Bay Brazil board member helping us to shape this organization. I'm so very thankful to all my board members. And of course, Rodrigo Veloso, Head of Gaming at YouTube. Thank you, Rodrigo. And I'll give the word to Heather. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, good morning. As Marguerite said, my name is Heather Somerville, and I'm a reporter with the Bay Area News Group, covering a wide range of business and technology issues, and have done quite a bit of reporting on connections between the Valley and Brazil. I'm happy to be here. We have a really great panel to talk about the economic scenario in Brazil as best we can in an hour. We'll touch on a few topics from who's investing in Brazil, companies' presence in Brazil, or those companies who are looking to have a presence in Brazil, why Brazil is globally a strategic place to invest, the opportunities there, and also many of the paradoxes in that country with between the booming tech there, the rise of social and mobile, and that laid against some revised economic forecasts, which have been reduced from 3.5% to 3% this year, increasing unease about that company's economic future, and persistent problems with infrastructure and social unrest there, such as the protests that were mentioned in the opening remarks. So I will start with handing it over to our panelists, and we have to my left Andy Tao, who is Managing Director of Silicon Valley Bank, and his company is doing a lot to build relationships in Brazil. Next to Andy is Avanish Sahai, Vice President of Partnerships at Salesforce.com. And he can talk a little bit about the office that they are looking to build in that country. Next to Avanish is Vicente Silveira, Director of Engineering at LinkedIn, who is doing some interesting work with the workforce in that country. And finally, Rodrigo Veloso, who is Head of Gaming at YouTube. YouTube is, of course, owned by Google, which has had for a while now a very strong presence in Brazil. So each panelist will start by first talking a little bit about their company's presence in Brazil, and then why the Brazilian market is important to their company. So Andy, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody. Bom dia. Silicon Valley Bank, just a little bit of background. We are a financial services firm, primarily a commercial bank. Here in the U.S. We've been here for 30 years, and as a bank, we're different because we focus exclusively on the technology and innovation space, oftentimes starting with entrepreneurs at a very early stage and scaling up with them to infinity. So we work with 1 out of every 2 venture-backed tech companies in the U.S. And in the last decade, we have been expanding internationally, and we have now today offices in the United Kingdom, in China, in India, Israel. And what we've seen over the past decade is the acceleration of the globalization of our business. And there are a lot of new geographies where there are a lot of interesting things going on from our perspective. And Brazil kind of sits on the top of that list. We're also looking at some other countries such as Russia or Turkey. But we see a lot of activity in Brazil, and we've been there, I should say we've been going there for about the past 2 years, flying in on a quarterly basis. And one of the things that kind of drew us there, I think the ambassador sort of talked a little bit about, sort of all the fabulous demographics that comprise Brazil in terms of potentially launching, the opportunity to launch new businesses there. Also the high growth environment in the economy over the last decade. Of course, that's slowed a little the last 2 years, but you've had such a rising tide in terms of wealth creation and the emerging middle class there. And that has created more entrepreneurship and as well as the flow of international capital into the markets. And many of our partners here in the U.S., particularly those on Sandal Road, began to make investments on a regular basis in Brazilian companies, and that certainly caught our eye. So again, we've been very enthusiastic about what's been happening in the Brazilian ecosystem, the development of it, and we have been, the banking business is highly regulated, so there is, while we don't have a license to do business in Brazil, we have been working offshore with Brazilian companies as well as helping them as they come across to the U.S.
Avanish.
Great. Thank you, Heather, and bom dia. Eu sou brasileiro, but today I'll speak in English. So I am the Vice President of Alliances at Salesforce.com. How many of you know Salesforce.com? Okay, it's the vast majority. So Salesforce.com, so very quickly, is the leader in what we call enterprise cloud computing. And there's a big change happening in the corporate and business IT world around cloud computing, software as a service. And Salesforce is probably the pioneer, recognized as the pioneer in that. We've been doing that and only that for about 14 years. In addition to what we have as our core customer relationship management solution, we also have a customer support solution, we have a marketing solution, and a platform for building applications in the cloud. And that's a business that I run, which is how do we get partners to build on our platform. So Brazil for us has been an interesting market. We actually have never had an office in Brazil, but we have thousands of customers in Brazil. How is that? So we have 3 groups that deal with Brazil within Salesforce. One is a group here in San Francisco. They get on the phone and they call prospective customers. And we have tons of customers who are small and medium business who use Salesforce.com from Brazil with our servers wherever they may be. A second group primarily lives out of Miami, and they go in and out of Brazil every few weeks, and they have relationships with some of the most well-known Brazilian companies, Embraer, Petrobras, Votorantim, et cetera, who are also customers. So with large customers, we fly people in and out. And then my team has people also based here in San Francisco who fly in and out to build a partner ecosystem as well. So with all that, and with some of the trends that the ambassador and Andy just talked about, we are now actually, we just announced that we're going to open an office in Brazil. And we announced it in June, and we're expecting to open it by the end of this year or beginning of next year. So for us, that's a very important step in making Brazil an even more critical country, because Salesforce is a global company, but our go-to-market strategy is very country-based. And now with the kind of opportunities we see in Brazil and with the presence we have, we see that growing much more substantially. So we'll have an office there in São Paulo early next year. And we'll talk a bit more about some of the trends in the follow-up questions.
Great, thanks. Vicente, on to you.
Thank you, Heather. So my name is Vicente Silveira. I'm a Director of Engineering at LinkedIn. I'm also a native of Brazil and born in Rio de Janeiro. Came here about 12 years ago. I believe many of you know LinkedIn. I mean, we're the world's largest professional network with more than 238 million people all across like 200 countries across the globe. We were founded 10 years ago, and since then, the company's been growing in a very fast pace. We're now growing at more than 2 members per second. LinkedIn has about 4,200 employees that are spread across 26 cities worldwide. And our mission is to connect all the world's professionals to make them more successful and more productive. And I think this is it's really core to what LinkedIn is going to try to do in Brazil and what we've been doing there since we started our kind of global expansion. But maybe even more important than that for me is LinkedIn's vision, which is to provide every person in the world access to economic opportunity. And I think this is really core for Brazil and for a country that is going through the fast clip of development that we see there. So I really believe in this vision, and I want to see it come to fruition in Brazil and the world elsewhere. So LinkedIn in Brazil, we have now about 13 million members, and it's really one of our priority strategic markets. And the growth in Brazil has been really amazing. Back in 2010, so about 3 years ago, was when we first translated the site to Portuguese. And before it was just English. And we had about 1 million people, or 1 million Brazilians at that time on the site. So you fast forward to November 2011, and which is when we opened our first office there, and we already had 6 million people. So basically, it went 6 times what we had before, just because we localized to the language. And then as you move to now, we're opening a new office there, where we're going to have about 50 employees, I believe is what we have there now. And we're at 13 million members, which is a big segment of what is LinkedIn's core target audience today, what we call professionals. So it's interesting. I mean, if you look, more than 50,000 Brazilian companies are on LinkedIn today. If you look at largest companies like Petrobras, they have a large number of followers, like 250,000 followers for Petrobras on the platform. And we're just kind of scratching the surface, because we're taking the product as it exists globally and as really was designed for early on, like 10 years ago for the US. And we're starting to see how we can customize this for strategic markets like Brazil. And there are very interesting things that we're starting to learn there. And I knew coming from Brazil was that there is a close relationship between your social life and your professional life in Brazil in many ways. So people love to do the beer after work. So all of those things, right? So we're trying to figure out how we're going to make this product even more successful there. We believe that the low unemployment rate in Brazil now, even with a little bit of the turmoil this year, is really increasing the demand for talent there, which is great for a platform like LinkedIn, and we think we can bring a lot of value to the market.
Great, good. Rodrigo.
Good morning. I'm Rodrigo Veloso. I work at YouTube on the Content Partnerships Organization of YouTube. YouTube is the world's largest video website. We're part of Google, it runs the world's largest website, the world's largest search engine, and is now getting into other areas like glasses and cars and exciting things like that. We've been in Brazil since 2005. Shortly after our IPO, we opened our first office in Brazil, because it was already one of our largest user bases. And we then acquired another company in Belo Horizonte that became our second office shortly after. And I joined the company in Brazil in 2007. And at that time, we had about 70 people maybe in our operations there, and now we're closer to 700. So we've grown 10 times in the last 6 years. And that's pretty much what our business has done as well, thankfully. And I think it's still today, even after all of this growth, even after achieving a certain scale in Brazil, it continues to be one of our fastest growing markets. For YouTube, it's the 3rd largest YouTube audience in the world. So we're going to continue to invest quite a lot in growing our businesses there. And then I think we'll get into all of the details.
We will. Thanks so much, everybody. So we've heard, from everything from a local financial institution to one of the area's leading cloud platforms, that people want to get into Brazil. And it's not just here, you go out into Silicon Valley, you talk to companies everywhere. I do it every day, and they want to get into Brazil. So let's dig in a little bit deeper as to why. And I think, Avanish, we're going to start with you. You had mentioned you already have, Salesforce.com already has many, many customers, but the opportunities you see in Brazil have led to this next step of opening an office. So what exactly are those opportunities?
Absolutely. Thanks, Heather. So if you think about some of the core data, let me just throw some numbers out at you guys, and you tell me if this is big or not. So the IT spending in Latin America is about $120 billion. This is from IDC. How much of that is Brazil? Anybody? How much? 70. Percent? 70 billion. Yeah, it's about 70 billion. It's about half of IT spending in Latin America is in Brazil, and that's hardware, software, and services. That's a big number. Then you look at some of the other trends. You look at, and that grew by 27% last year. So no matter what we talk about slowdown in GDP and growth and whatnot, IT spending is growing at a phenomenal clip. That's much faster than the average IT spending in any other country, right? Brazil is now the number 7 in IT spend worldwide, just past India, China, and Australia. Those are big numbers. And this is a country where I think the ambassador mentioned 230 million. The data I have is 250 million mobile devices. That's more than the population. And that starts to create a very intriguing opportunity for us, whether on the consumer side, which is what YouTube and LinkedIn would perhaps look at, as well as on the business side. And for Salesforce, mobile and social on top of a cloud platform, that is our business. And when we see those kind of numbers, when we see those kind of opportunities, and we also see a very sophisticated buying market. You have financial institutions, you have telecom companies, you have manufacturing organizations who are already pretty sophisticated. They're becoming global. They're going off and doing global M&A. They're thinking about how to rationalize their processes in a worldwide supply chain. It creates just tremendous opportunity for innovation. It creates tremendous opportunity to take what has been legacy infrastructure and software and say, what does the next generation of that look like? And that's why for Salesforce, it becomes a tremendous market opportunity, both as end customers. Some of the names I talked about are established companies. Those of you who are from Brazil would know these companies for decades. But they're thinking about innovation. They're thinking about what is the next, how do I optimize my business processes? How do I engage better with my customers? How do I work better with my partners? And so that's a core part of the Salesforce mission, is to help enable that. And that's why we think those kind of opportunities exist. For my particular business, the second part of that is we also want local partners, local software companies who understand the very specific nature of Brazilian or even Latin American markets. There's this concept of nota fiscal electrónica that does not exist in a lot of other countries, which is how do you kind of report to the government what taxes you collected, if you collected them, right? Well, that's something that is a unique set of capabilities that are required for that market. Or I travel pretty much around the world. Brazil is the only country that I walk into a restaurant, I never give my credit card and it disappears, right? They'll bring you the credit card machine on a wireless device. Why? A lot of fraud, right? So now that was an innovation that was required by some of the local conditions. So those are the kind of things that we see consumer-wise, business-wise, just tremendous opportunity to establish a strategic presence in a market like that.
Great, thanks. But who else wants to expand on that? Maybe Andy, you've been working to build those relationships. You've been in conversations with folks in Brazil for about a year or two now. So what are you seeing there which make it such a promising place to expand?
Well, I think, for one thing, if you look back on, I guess there's a little bit of a spotlight that's been shined on Brazil over the last couple of years because of the influx of more international capital. But I think that probably does a little bit of injustice to the investor community that was there really for the past, since the 90s in terms of a venture capital community. And so we, already an existing core of investors that were building interesting companies. And I think entrepreneurs, while initially more domestic market focused, it's a little bit like China in that sense. Brazil's such a large domestic market that entrepreneurs could really just focus on Brazil and build a big company. But with the influx of international capital today, we see a few things happening. One, sort of more of the more standard best practices from around the world that are being brought in. For example, a a lot of Brazilian venture capitalists who take money from Brazilian pension funds or government entities. They require a seat on their investment committee, which is very highly unusual when you apply them to Silicon Valley standards, certainly, or most other geographies around the globe. So things like that are changing. And another interesting phenomenon we see is the influx of entrepreneurs from around the world. So it's a bit like Silicon Valley when you think of the success of this region, where so many people from around the best and brightest have come around from around the world to launch their businesses here. It's very interesting when you spend time in the early stage community in Sao Paulo or Rio, and you see the folks that have come down from the U.S. or from Europe to launch a business with very little, sort of family connection to Brazil. And I think of the diapers.com equivalent, which is called baby.com.br, and it's two American cousins who graduated from business school and launched this very, very successful e-commerce business there now. So it's those kind of trends that are happening there that make it a very exciting ecosystem. And I think today it's still the tendency to focus on building large companies locally, but I think we're already seeing examples where I think those applications can be taken globally. And for us at Silicon Valley Bank, those companies are probably the most interesting, those who are trying to aim to be global leading companies. And I think in the not too distant future, I think you'll see some of those come from Brazil. And that's why we're spending increasing amounts of time there.
Great. Thank you. So lots of e-commerce going on there, some initiatives to make safer credit card transactions, and maybe we're just going to wrap up on this topic with some more about mobile. I mean, we talk about the number of cell phones there, and they're not all smartphones, of course, but this is part of the drive. So Vicente or Rodrigo, do you guys want to talk a little bit more about the mobile boom there and why that's appealing?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. And so as we are expanding globally, we see that in certain markets, you really need to think with a kind of like a mobile-first attitude, right? Because that's the platform that really gave to a lot of people first access to the internet, which is not the case as it happened in the developed world. So it is the case in Brazil, and with like Avanish was saying, with more cell phones than the population, we need to be able to have a way for our members to be able to use the site and to get the value from it, essentially having a pure mobile experience on the platform. So there's a lot of work at LinkedIn to increase the capabilities of our mobile apps, and also figuring out, what are the other platforms? Because here we think about, iPhones and, iOS devices or Android. Well, if you go to Brazil and in other countries, there are other platforms that are very popular, right? And they're not so powerful, but they're important if you really want to be inclusive, right? So that's my comment on mobile. I have one other comment that I think it's, at least for LinkedIn, is really important about Brazil, which is there's a huge kind of a search for talent in Brazil, and it's very scarce. And it sounds like you think software engineers are scarce here in Silicon Valley. I mean, you should go to Brazil and you see the situation there. I was talking yesterday to a teacher from actually my alma mater, Rio, was having lunch with me, and he was saying he has all these research projects, and he can't put, a student to work on it because they're getting hired out of school, right? And I remember when I graduated that basically, just getting a government grant or a research grant to be able to go do some research was a great alternative. Now it's not anymore because there's so much competition for talent. Petrobras alone wants to hire more engineers than all the schools in Brazil can graduate. So I think that for us, that's a huge opportunity, and also to help the country solve a kind of a big bottleneck.
To that, I don't have much to add. I think most of it's been said. I just add that there's an extraordinary adherence in Brazil with the Brazilian population to consumer technology in a way that's above average in the world. So the usage time that we see compared to what it costs to be online and what it costs to have a smartphone is really impressive, and Brazil over-indexes on usage of all sorts of entertainment, information, and social technology. And that's what makes it very attractive.
Good, wonderful, thank you. We've heard plenty of the positives. Picture isn't all rosy though, and I think Andy had mentioned earlier that of course Brazil is one of the BRIC nations, and like all of the other BRIC nations, there are a myriad of challenges. And so we're going to kind of take these complexities in two buckets. The first being the economic challenges. And so, Andy, talk a little bit about why is there this sudden slump, and what does that mean? Is that a real bad thing? Is this a normal thing? What are you noticing from investors pulling back?
Sure. So, I think if you look back on GDP growth over the last 2 years, I think last year, I think they keep revising it downward. Unfortunately, it was a little less than 1%, I think. And this year it's tracking, I think they're aiming at 3%, and I think it's looking reasonably good, but there's certainly inflation is a challenge right now. It's already been mentioned in that really expensive pizza. I think as a result, as you said, Heather, the slowdown in all the BRICS, you have a bit of a chilling effect that's happening in the community that we spend time in, again, in the venture capital and innovation ecosystem. So, if you rewound a year ago to the mood and environment in the entrepreneurial community, it was the kind of the sky was the limit, and a lot of enthusiasm. And we've seen this movie before here in the U.S. many times, right? It's kind of peak of the market behavior. You could look at 2006 or the year 2000. Valuations, expectations from entrepreneurs were very high. They looked across their peer group and said, hey, if that company deserves that valuation, then I certainly deserve that, even if they haven't kind of proved that business model out yet. And so what you have now with a slowdown in the economy, the kind of, as I mentioned before, this kind of rising tide environment where it's easier, it takes away some of the, it covers mistakes, if you will, when you have a high growth economy. When that slows a little bit, I think investors really begin to say again, hey, we need to focus on the basic blocking and tackling to build value, to create businesses, and we have to be really smart and disciplined on things like valuations. So, fast forward to where the market is today, and I was just down at the Next Web conference in Sao Paulo a few weeks ago. It's a much more sober mood. The funding is much more difficult to receive. The early stage investor community is being much more selective with their investments, as they should be. And so I think, again, similar to what we've seen here in the US, there's been a wave of really early stage companies that are being funded out of accelerators and incubators that have popped up quite a bit in the last couple of years. So I think you'll see a little bit of a Series A crunch happening like we have here. It's not all those entrepreneurs that will get funded. And likewise, I think with the US funds slowing down a little bit, again, being more selective, there's some questions with respect to how much follow-on financing is available as well. But Heather, to get back to your question on is this a good thing or a bad thing, I think ultimately it's a good thing. I think, as I mentioned, when you have sort of that frothy peak of market behavior, that can't last for very long, and so the pendulum's kind of shifted in the other direction. I think most investors today, there's several in the room, would say this is a really good time to be investing in Brazil because valuation expectations have come down, companies are being more disciplined, and it's a good time to kind of create value.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe, well, things appear dismal on the surface. Underneath, there are opportunities there.
Yeah, I think long, kind of medium term, certainly all the trends are, all the appeal and opportunities to build high growth companies are still there.
Okay.
For sure.
Great. Okay, good. So we don't just have some economic challenges to work through, and it sounds like, as Andy says, the pendulum is swinging in the right direction, we think. There are also plenty of social challenges to work through, which may be even a little bit thornier. So for that issue and exactly how when you look at Brazil, companies should try to navigate some of those social complexities. I'm going to go to Vicente to talk a little bit about what exactly the social unrest there is all about right now, and then how that might pose a challenge to companies such as Salesforce.com, such as others that are looking to establish themselves there.
Yeah, I'm afraid I may disappoint you in the audience because I'm not sure I know exactly all the reasons why the social unrest happened in Brazil. I'm not sure even people there know, right? As I follow my friends on Twitter and Facebook as they discuss throughout all the movement and the protests in June, and they're still ongoing to some extent. And it's really interesting. I think you need to look at it from a macro level as part of almost like a new era of protests, and that can achieve critical mass very quickly, right? You've seen that in the Arab Spring, you've seen that in Turkey, and other places in Egypt, and you saw that in Brazil as well, in a different flavor. And a lot of that powered by things like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. And it's interesting, like there's this it's called ninja press, right? And basically they have this kind of like guerrilla journalism that was reporting on what was going on as a parallel means to the normal channels of communication there. And it was really powered by people with cell phones, video camera, uploading to places like YouTube, right? So a lot of that is happening, and I mean, you can look at some of the reasons, right? The trigger, you could say, oh, it was a BuzzFeed hike, but really you look back and there was a growing discontent with a range of issues, right? Related to infrastructure, to healthcare, to education, and corruption, right? And I think, in general, it shows that when you look at a place like Brazil, where there was a lot of progress in the last years, and now Brazil signed up for very high-profile world-class events. I think that there's a much higher expectation in the population, right? And I recall 30 years ago, right? My mom and my dad in Rio, 1 million people on the streets. São Paulo was 1.5 million people, largest protest ever in the country, to gain the right, to ask for the right to vote for president. I was there as a teenager, I never forget, and that was just 30 years ago, right? So back then you couldn't vote for president. I mean, are you going to protest corruption? Are you going to protest that, a bus hike happened when you have a dictatorship in place? It's a much harder proposition. So I think that, so for me, that puts in perspective where I think Brazil is today and where it should go. And some of the stuff that I like to look at from just to put this in context is, if you look at the Human Development Index and where we are in Brazil versus where we were back in the day where I was a teenager in those protests, and a lot has been achieved, right? The average, the mean average life expectation moved from 60 to 74 years old. The mean school years moved from 2.6 to 7.2 years of schooling. So these are huge, huge changes, and I think that it's great that these protests are happening now. I think the outcome is going to be necessarily positive, and I go back to I think it was Fareed Zakaria that said on CNN that if you look at some of these protests, that it's almost like looking back at the US in the early democracy, where it's very messy, right? But it really points in the right direction. It's building the systems, checks and balances that we have here today.
Great, thank you. So then let's bring that back to companies who want to make their presence in Brazil known. Is that a challenge for them? Is that a problem?
Yeah,
a concern?
I mean, I think any company that wants to establish itself in Brazil will deal with a complicated, very complicated tax system, tariffs, right? If you produce hardware, importing things in Brazil, because the tariffs are huge, right? You have to deal with now, even with a high cost of doing business there. But I think that at the end of the day, on the other side of that is a prize of a very almost like Western-like market that has 200 million people and a growing middle class.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit to that, I think there's a very fundamental thing that Sanchez said that resonates very much with me and my own perception of what's going on, that the protest and the unrest that exists is very much the result of progress that we've made over the past 20, 30 years. And there are some clear signs of that. So meaning people are complaining more because people are more well informed about how much they pay in taxes, about what their rights are, about what exists elsewhere in the world and works elsewhere in the world. So the bar has gone up, and the population is becoming more demanding, and there are indicators that is what happened. Not only on the education side, but also in terms of consumption of media. So the internet has made, of course, things much more accessible, information about the world. Vicentia was talking about Media Ninja, which is like a new guerrilla journalism group that, because of technology, has a way to reach people directly. But it's not this kind of new era of information and of commentary and sharing is not just on the internet. Brazil has actually been, over the past 4 or 5 years, one of the only markets in the world where print businesses were growing. So the book business was growing. The newspaper business was growing, and that was an effect of such a large portion of our population rising up from poverty into a situation where they can now consume some of these basic, let's say, a little past basic goods.
Well, as a journalist employed by a print publication, maybe I should move to Brazil. Good, and just one more point on this, the infrastructure in Brazil, and maybe, Avanish, if you want to take this during your own time that you've spent there, I mean, from things like network speeds all the way just to, basic transportation and logistics and public services, what is going on there that might still pose a challenge for companies that want to establish themselves and be successful in that market?
Yeah, so I think, and Vicentia and Rodrigo talked about this already a little bit, but what strikes me about Brazil, as someone who grew up there but has lived in the US for 20 plus years now, it's a country of tremendous contrast, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about this 250 million devices, but frankly, you cannot get a hospital bed if you're sick, right? So you've got this fundamental tension in the country about certain things that have been overinvested in because there is a proclivity to consume technology and consume capacity and so on, but at the same time, some basics like education, healthcare, infrastructure, et cetera, are not available. So it does create, but I think it also, to their points, the level of transparency is a lot higher now, and I think the aspirations of people are aligning with that, which says, look, we have this aspiration of being a really a world-class, first world country, if I can use that term, but there are some fundamental things that are still broken, right? So I think what the protests and the social economic tensions point to is the investment priorities, public and private, will need to align to that. I think things like network capacity. Yes, if you can afford it, you can get it, right? Which is part of market economy, but in some cases it also is not as efficient as it might be. I think transportation is the one that I suffered through quite a bit. Those of you who have been to Guarulhos Airport, I mean, that bathroom stinks more than a bus station bathroom in anywhere in the world. It is just inconceivable that a country that is having those kind of aspirations, some of the core infrastructure is still so far behind. So I think when you start looking at those things, flight delays, hard to get from point A to point B, it's the fundamental things that are part of a growing economy. I think the investment priorities will need to align to that. And we're still seeing some signs of that, but there's a long way to go.
Heather, may I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just to add to Avanish, I was pretty convinced that I was going to give Moscow the worst traffic in the world until I sat through 2 hours of traffic on Faria Lima in my last trip to Sao Paulo. So I think, to your point, maybe guys, a corporate helicopter might be in your future somewhere.
Part of the budget. Put in the budget.
But I would say that the one sort of maybe spin I would put on it, at least again as it applies to entrepreneurs, is that all this friction And the challenge is that if you know, these entrepreneurs really have to be innovative to navigate you know, the infrastructure there. And once they do that, it actually makes them quite nimble. And again, I think innovation becomes more natural to them than many you know, entrepreneurs from other parts of the world. So that's actually, I think, a good quality. Not to say that we shouldn't improve the infrastructure there, but.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks.
if you could just add one thing to the infrastructure comment. I saw this like 3 days ago and I was really surprised by it. So yes, you know, air traffic in Brazil and all the, you can't build just an airport, you know, overnight unless maybe in China, but not in Brazil. And the thing about that is the challenges infrastructure provide an opportunity, especially if you have leapfrog type technologies, right? Because Brazil's looking for that, right? Every developing country is looking for leapfrog technology. They can't just, you know, get where you are. They need to go faster, right? So interesting example of leapfrog technology, even something that we need here in the US desperately, air traffic control, right? So there were terrible problems in Brazil like a few years ago with, including loss of life. And with the World Cup coming along, you know, all the Brazilian airports, Brazilian airspace, especially over São Paulo, Rio, is congested. So opportunity for leapfrog technology that companies have been trying to implement here in the US for a long time, and it's perfect for Brazil. So GE, and in partnership with the, I guess, Brazilian equivalent to FAA, introduced a GPS-based landing system in airports like Rio, Santos Dumont, which if you ever flew in there, it's kind of crazy because you fly towards the Sugarloaf Rock, and then they bank over, and you can see like, you know, the people in the little cable car, and then it lands there. So it's really, you know, interesting. So, of course that makes it for, you know, you cannot put too many planes through that too fast. So this GPS landing system is now introduced in Brazil, and it's actually GE's now showcasing that here to see if that can be introduced here.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And so I think in our conversations around some of those existing challenges, I think we did sort of imply some of the work that Brazil needs to do to stay competitive in this global market. So I think maybe a good way to just close this is to take a look at what needs to happen both here in Silicon Valley and in Brazil for both regions to continue growing the relationships that we have and building new ones. And this can be either what the business community ought to be doing, what tech leaders ought to be doing, or what public officials ought to be doing. So I'll leave that kind of wide open, and I'll start down the end with Rodrigo and move towards Andy, and just offer a couple of insights or thoughts or advice, if you go so far, as to how to maintain the relationship between Brazil and Silicon Valley and continue to deepen it as well.
Well, I mean, I think talking a little bit about what Brazil needs to do to be competitive and to continue to grow and to continue to represent this giant that it is for tech businesses are really, I'm sad to say, the same problems, the same things that have needed to be done for the past 20 years. And that haven't been done and that have been systematically ignored by every government we've had. So one of them, the first one being the tax complexity. I think, Avanish referred to this, Vicente referred to this. This year, Brazil was elected with, we'd love to be number one, so we're really happy, but it was elected the most complex tax system in the world by the World Bank. This is something that a lot of companies only figure out once they're on the ground, unfortunately. But it does drain resources from what we're able to do in the country when we're spending 3% of our revenue just to be compliant with tax laws. This is not including what we actually pay in taxes. So that's something that it's been on political agendas for 20 years. The tax reform, possibly the most egregious part of it is and it's changing. Recently, a law was sanctioned to make taxes more transparent to people And I think that's a fundamental step also in making people more demanding of their government when they know how much they're paying in taxes, which has not been the case. But that's, I'd say, the number one area, the area in which we are by far the worst in the world. And it's not something to be proud of, obviously, and it's probably what needs our most urgent attention. The second point, and again, not a new issue, is the matter of the legal court system and the insecurity that it breeds. And I think, and I'm not referring here to, decisions that may be made to let certain, political, corrupt politicians go on a technicality, possibly today, that decision is going to be made. I'm actually referring from a business point of view to the insecurity of, being unable to collect, from insolvent customers, being unable to enforce contracts because the legal system is extraordinarily slow. And it makes it so that, it's almost, you have to incorporate that as well into your cost of doing business. So these are just a couple of the things that I think are representative of what we all mean and don't often enough specify when we say the Brazil cost, when we refer generically to the Brazil cost. Yeah. There's some very real costs that, at the end of the day, they drain from the business community's ability to invest in that market, because they represent a drain in that profitability and the return on that investment.
Okay, all right, so some improvements on Brazil's end. And Vicente, any thoughts on that relationship?
Yeah, I think I've been here since 2001, and I feel like that this is the ties between Brazil and Silicon Valley, in my view, have never been stronger than this year. I think there's lots of things happening. Just to name a few. Brazilian government launched a program called Startup Brazil. It's funding like $78 million for 100 startups in Brazil, which is really important. They're coming here. There's a new Brazilian Trade Development Agency launched an office here in San Francisco. So there's a lot of interchange. Private sector's coming. So we received its largest semiconductor fab in the southern hemisphere. They came to the valley because, and this is back to one of the challenges there's not enough educated people with the skills needed to operate something like that. So, how are they going to deliver on their business plan? They came here to basically, ask, Bay Brazil's help to go find the right people in, of course, Silicon Valley to go work on those initiatives. And so I think that it is a good moment, right? And I think that, some of the things that are being developed here right now will be key for helping Brazil overcome some of these challenges. For example, e-learning is a huge area that in order for you to get skilled people to work, you need to teach them. So I think a lot of things that we're doing here in the Valley will be very applicable to Brazil. But I actually want to point out that the relationships, it's not really just unidirectional, even though we tend to think, Brazil, developing country, needs to figure out, how to develop their own Silicon Valleys and all of that, which I think, everyone is trying to, and they should. And learn the new technologies, but there's also interesting things that are coming back from Brazil here. So I just saw this presentation, and I think it happened at TechCrunch Disrupt, and the mayor of San Francisco announced a new experiment that is first in the US, together maybe with New York, to have online participatory budgeting. So basically, instead of you just voting on someone to be able to actually decide how they're going to spend your tax dollars, you're actually going to be able to decide directly how those tax dollars are going to be spent. So they're starting with a small budget. But the interesting thing is, and Margarese mentioned that we received Porto Alegre mayor here, and he came here, of course, to learn, try to bring opportunity to his town, but he actually came here to teach, because Porto Alegre was the first city worldwide back in 1989 that actually created participatory budgeting. And so if you go there now, it's actually a process they do every year. And that they credit, the mayor credits, a lot of the progress in the city is not because of the mayors, it's because actually we put the people to decide. So these things are coming back here, and now here with Silicon Valley technology, we can even make it better.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah, so a couple points, and I think they'll build on what these guys already started talking about, right? So one, everybody asks, what's the secret of success for Silicon Valley? There's many, but I think one of the big ones is the very tight connection between the universities and the venture community, for example, right? It's easy. It's, a lot of the professors at Berkeley, Stanford are limited partners at venture firms. They get ideas. They call some of their buddies up and say, hey, here's some set of students that you should really look at. That notion and that ability to interact between education systems and the investment community, I think, is starting to turn in Brazil, but it's been typically very hard. It's been very purist. Hey, I'm an academic, I'm a researcher. That commercial stuff, I don't care about, right? I think that logjam has to be broken up. And then there's really good examples. I think at TechCrunch, I heard from someone that the largest participation outside the US was from Brazilian companies. That is phenomenal. That would have never happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think that's, innovation is being fostered. I think cost of capital has gone down to get things into the market, whether it's because of innovations like cloud or it's open source, et cetera. Especially in the software business, the cost of innovation has gone down substantially. You don't need $30, $40 million to prove your business. And I think that's a big step in the right direction for a country like Brazil, where you may not have that much access to capital, is to find ways to innovate on a tighter budget and prove that you have a business. The second part, which Rodrigo started talking about, and I'll just share some data, the Brazil cost is a very real cost. When we look at, in the case of Salesforce, we've been doing a fair amount of analysis before we decided to get into the country. Why? Because there was this fear of the cost, and we analyzed across different markets and so on. And in general, just the payroll cost in Brazil is 2 to 3 times higher than comparable countries. 2 to 3 times. And then within that, forget trying to figure out which those are. I mean, there's so many acronyms in there. But that's a real cost, right? And it's not like the salaries are lower. You're still paying very high salaries, and on the top of that, that's a burden that just takes more and more. So that is something that I think needs to be done. I don't see as much movement, and there's a lot of talk about it in every government, but not as much movement as one would want to see.
Great, thank you. And I love that you both mentioned the important role of the university, and Stanford is one of the best examples. You go around campus and you talk to students. I guarantee you'll find a few Brazilian students here to learn, to study, to go back home, work in tech, start their own companies, and lots of professors who are inviting of Brazilian companies to come to campus and talk to their students. So that's a great point. And last thoughts, Andy, on this?
Well, I think a lot has been already said, so not too much more to add, but I guess as much as I appreciate the state of Texas and Florida, I would please ask that we get a direct connection between the city of San Francisco and either Rio or Sao Paulo. That would certainly make the connection a bit easier. And then let me plug Margarita again and the great work she's doing in terms of these kind of organizations like Bay Brazil. And this is really quite unique, I think, being really a great bridge between Brazil and the Bay Area, and to keep supporting it and growing it, I think will be just another way to do that.
Good. Great. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes, and I'd like to open it up to questions if anybody has any. And if you do, if you'd come down to the microphone and ask, and if you have one for a specific member of the panel, please say that, or one of them can just jump in. Does anyone have questions?
Very general question, since this is Silicon Valley. What percentage of the Brazilian economy and what percentage of exports are actually knowledge-based, what we would consider high technology? Because from general reading in The Economist and so forth, it appears the commodity boom has really impacted at least the older metal bending industries in Brazil. There's been some degree of deindustrialization. So I'm wondering what the trends are in the high-tech sector.
I'm looking for the data. I have it, I have it somewhere. I think in the software business, if I remember correctly, it's only about 3% is export. So the vast majority is local development, local consumption. And I think to Andy's earlier point, I think that'll change. There are innovations coming in that start to make sense in a global way, but it's not been easy, and I think it's something that's yet to change.
I would add to that. I think we have some poles of technological development in Brazil. I think Belo Horizonte is one of them. Porto Alegre is another. In the Northeast, there's a pole in
Natal.
Recife,
Natal.
But we are, I think, behind in terms of knowledge-based innovation. I think when you look at academic research, we're number 15 in the world, maybe in university, patenting, publications, things like that. So it's certainly an area that needs improvement and that's not aligned with the size of the country and the creativity of the country and the ability and talents of its people. But I'd say it's probably one of the toughest questions to address, and so many more basic problems need to be fixed before we can really aspire to moving ahead on that ladder.
Will Gull and Azul survive, or will they be taken over by LATAM?
Sorry, could you?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Will Gol and Azul, the airline,
Gold
survive?
and Azul, will they survive, or will they be taken over by LATAM? You know what LATAM is?
Yeah.
TAM
Yeah.
and
TAM and
land.
Yeah, land. Yeah.
I like Azul. I flew a lot of Azul from especially because it started getting easier to get to the airport in Campinas than into the airport in Sao Paulo from where I live. So I switched to Azul and had great experiences. Very, I think it's a competitive market. People are going to travel more. I would joke while I was still living in Brazil. I would always have fun when this is one of the impacts of the Workers' Party government, as you started seeing on the news. Well, there's this big problem in the airport. A bunch of flights are delayed. Let's interview someone who's flying. And the profession of the person underneath was merendera, which is like lunch lady, and that's for me a great indicator of what's to come in terms of a growing number. Like I was talking before about access to print, access to newspapers. I think where certain sectors, even if the economy does slow down, will continue to accelerate just because there's been so much pent-up demand for those services and for those products.
Yeah, I mean, I think like airline business is highly regulated everywhere. I mean, even here in the U.S., I think it has to be like a majority-owned company to fly an airline here. Even Virgin had to basically had a majority-owned partner here. And I'm sure it's even worse in Brazil. So I'm not sure they would be able to consolidate at that level. I would say that both Go and Azul, I think they're very innovative, and Azul especially just grew out of nowhere. It's actually interesting because the founder is Brazilian and American, and he created JetBlue here, and then he went to Brazil and created Azul. So Blue, Azul, same thing. Right?
Another question?
Yeah, I would like just to put some comments on that. The founder of Azul, Dave Newman, was here a couple of weeks ago when Apex, the Brazilian Trade and Investment Agency, opened its office. And he seemed very, very enthusiastic about the prospects of the company. The growth of the company was incredible. In terms of number of flights, is now the number one in the domestic market, number one airline. So he was very enthusiastic. And I would like to just add a comment on what you have said now. Yesterday, I was at a seminar in one very well-known university, East Bay. But apparently we can't say its name here, but and we were also discussing with the dean of the engineering department the possibility of hosting perhaps a seminar next year to launch kind of broad and intense partnership program of collaboration between this East Bay University and Brazil. And we met Gavin Newsom, the Lieutenant Governor of California. Also, he was at this seminar, and we would like to invite him to host, to open the seminar. And the seminar was on open data and how open data can improve democratic governance. And I had with me some articles on participatory budgeting, and he commented with me that I was in Porto Alegre, and this participatory budgeting is a very interesting scheme, etc. And I grabbed a couple of articles in English that I had about this participatory budgeting and gave it to him. So he was very interested about, and perhaps some collaboration between San Francisco and Brazil on this specific subject is going on as well. But just to tell you that on the academic level, there's something going on, and we hope that we can foster that, and perhaps Stanford can get interested in not letting the other East Bay University go alone. So, just that.
Is there one final question before we wrap up?
The gentleman from Salesforce talked about the cost of labor, and I'd like if the panel could address productivity and how Brazil can increase productivity. I think 6 or 7 months ago, Exami had an article, why are we so unproductive? And the stat was for every American employee, the productivity level requires 5 employees in Brazil, not necessarily because the Brazilians don't work hard, but because of cost, lack of technology, and I think there's some fundamental things that need to be corrected as far as labor laws, incentives to go into public service as opposed to entrepreneurial efforts, and anyone's opinion on that would be appreciated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just make a comment that when, and this is not the case as much anymore, but when labor was so cheap, you basically, there's the knee-jerk reaction of just throwing people at the problem, right? And I think that's going to be less and less an option moving forward. I think it's already the case. The problem is that, access to technology has not kept up with the increase in the cost of labor. So now they're kind of like, they can't pay the person, but they can't buy the technology either. So it's like, that's kind of like the problem. So I think we need to get the access to technology to a much cheaper level so that we can address productivity issue there.
I also think the switch to a knowledge economy will drive that. I don't think that has happened enough there yet. And that is part of the transition we're seeing, right? When we compare it to the US or the UK or Germany, those are heavily knowledge-driven economies. And the metrics are a little bit different for that rather than a more traditional manufacturing economy, for example.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much to all the panelists. Do we want to take one more question, Marguerite?
Yeah, we can have one more.
Okay.
Last one.
There's one over here.
Well, I'm just curious right now. Vicente said something that really caught my attention. You said something about LinkedIn wants to connect people to promote the growth, the economic opportunities. And Rodrigo said that one of the things that make Brazilians right now more demanding because they have access to technology so they can compare things, they can expect more. My question is, I'm going to try to do this short. How does this company, when they go to Brazil, they want to hire and make profits and develop and get the talents, but my question is, do you really have the intent to also guide consumption in terms of educating the population to buy more, consume more, and better in general? Because here in US, we are some steps forward. So in Brazil, I mean, like I think one of you guys said about maybe the first opportunity that someone has to have access to the internet sometimes is by mobile device. So it's something, it's new, so some work must be done. Do your company have any project about guiding consumption and teaching, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can say, I think that any young economy, there is the risk when people start getting access to things like credit, for example, right? That they're going to just spend on things that they don't need or get in too much debt. And that's not just true to Brazil. It was true. I mean, it is true here to some extent, and it was much worse. I think that by giving people access to technology, I think it gives them the tools to be able to make better decisions, right, about how they're going to consume, right? And I think that when it comes to LinkedIn, we believe that by connecting these professionals, they will have access to that better information. They will have access to maybe a better job, and maybe to be able to think long term, right? And when you think long term, you might be able to not just go with too much of the consumer pressure to buy things right today, but maybe to think about what you can do 1-2 years from now.
From Google's perspective, I think where our core mission is to make information more accessible and useful to people. So in and of itself, that's already, I think it is very much part of our mission to help people easily find better information with which to make decisions. I think we go a step further, and I think you're talking about consumer advocacy maybe, and Ralph Nader type stuff, which is amazing here in the United States, and you're right, very limited in Brazil. Now, I think it's not our, consumer advocacy is not our core function, but I think we do, and echoing Vicente's point, technology does enable that to happen. And I think not just from consumer advocacy groups, but just from people's access and ability to share information. Increasingly you see people tweeting when they have complaints about some service, making a YouTube video. Very recently, I think it was the very first case of somebody actually buying advertisements on Twitter to bitch about an airline. Like they paid to complain and to have their complaint more heard by other people, and that's obviously going to change the way businesses operate. I think a great example we recently had on YouTube was when a comedy troupe that's become very popular on YouTube called Porta dos Fundos. They made a video about a restaurant chain called Spoleto. I don't know if a lot of you were able to see it, but it was a parody in which the consumer's trying to get served in this restaurant where you have a ton of options, and the server's putting a bunch of pressure on how to do it. I think the fascinating conclusion of that story is that then Spoleto didn't sue Porta dos Fundos or try to have some complaint to get that video taken down, which traditionally might have been an approach someone could take in Brazil, particularly a local business. Rather, they engaged with the comedy troupe and had them, create follow-up videos where that guy was getting trained to not treat people that way. And so it really connected with consumers, and it really showed, a higher, degree of evolution and enlightenment with regard to, how people want to be treated, how consumers want to be treated, and who they want to do business with. So I think, by enabling that, we're definitely contributing to consumer education.
Thank you. That was a really good question to end on. Thank you so much. So thanks, everybody, and thank you, Andy, Avanish, Vicente, Rodrigo, for sharing your wealth of knowledge, and thank you, Margaris and Bay Brazil, for the opportunity. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day.
Thank you, Heather.